Let me start by saying this is a long story, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm Lexi, 25, and I've got a stepsister, Brianna, who's 26. We also have 2 younger half-siblings, but this story is really about Brianna and me. Mainly how she's been a total nightmare from the moment our parents got married. I was 7 when my mom married her dad. I was supposed to be excited about gaining a new family, but from day one, Brianna made it clear she didn't want me around. I tried to be nice, you know? I figured maybe we could be friends and play together, typical kid stuff. But nope, Brianna wasn't having it. She would look at me like I was the biggest inconvenience in her life, like I didn't deserve to be in the same room as her. At first, I thought maybe she was upset about her dad remarrying, and I was just the easiest target. I mean, I was the new kid in her life. But as time went on, it became obvious that she just flat out didn't like me. It wasn't just at home either. We went to the same elementary school, and Brianna made sure everyone knew we weren't real sisters. She'd say things like, "Oh, she's just my stepsister. We're not actually related." That hurt. I was just trying to figure out how families worked, and she was going out of her way to reject me. It wasn't just words, though. She would embarrass me in front of other kids, especially at school. I remember one time during recess, she told everyone that my mom only married her dad because we needed somewhere to live. I was 7. It was cruel, and I didn't understand why she hated me so much. My stepdad, her dad, noticed how bad things were getting. He'd try to step in and tell Brianna to stop, to treat me like family. And for a while, it kind of worked. She'd behave when he was around. But as soon as he wasn't looking, she went back to making me feel like I didn't belong. Honestly, as a little kid, it crushed me. I was just trying to adjust to this new family, and having someone constantly remind me that I wasn't wanted made everything 10 times harder. I used to come home from school in tears, telling my mom how Brianna was treating me. My mom would always say, "She'll come around, just give her time." Spoiler alert, she never came around. Things only got worse when Brianna tried to pull our younger half-siblings into her little hate campaign. She'd tell them, "Lexi's not your real sister." They were too young to understand what was going on, but the fact that she would try to turn them against me was messed up. I won't say my entire childhood was ruined by Brianna, though. My mom and stepdad did their best to make me feel included, but it always felt like there was a shadow hanging over me. Brianna's constant reminder that, to her, I wasn't really part of the family. Middle school was when things really hit a low point. Brianna started spreading rumors about me. I remember one time she told everyone at school that I had stolen something from her. I hadn't, but kids believed her, and suddenly I was the thief at school. It was humiliating. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It felt like she was actively trying to destroy my life. My stepdad eventually had to put his foot down. Brianna's behavior got so bad that she stopped coming over to our house for a while. He told her that if she couldn't be civil, she shouldn't bother coming around at all. Honestly, it was a relief not to have her around, but it didn't solve the problem. She eventually moved in with her mom full-time when she was around 13, and I thought maybe the distance would help. Maybe if we didn't see each other all the time, things would get better. Spoiler alert, it didn't. We still saw each other for holidays and birthdays, and every time she made it clear that nothing had changed. She was still just as cruel and dismissive, still determined to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. By the time we were teenagers, I had given up on having any sort of relationship with her. I spent years trying to be nice, trying to reach out, and she never once made any effort to meet me halfway. So I stopped caring. If she wanted to act like I didn't exist, then fine. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on her. When we were 16, she had her first child. Yeah, Brianna got pregnant at 16 and moved back in with us for a while. You'd think maybe becoming a mother would soften her and make her realize that life is more than petty grudges. Nope. If anything, she got worse. She wouldn't let me be anywhere near her baby. She'd tell me not to touch, talk to, or even look at her kid, like I was some kind of danger. That was the last straw for me. I knew then that there would never be any kind of sisterly bond between us. She made sure of that. From that point on, I focused on my own life and stopped caring about whatever she was doing. If she wanted to be bitter and hateful, that was her problem, not mine. Years passed, and we barely saw each other. I had my own life, and as far as I was concerned, I was done with Brianna. But as it turns out, Brianna wasn't done with me. I thought I was done with Brianna, but she wasn't done with me. After years of no contact, out of the blue, I got a call from my mom a couple of months ago. Now my mom doesn't usually call unless something's up, so I knew it wasn't going to be good news. I pick up and she says, "Lexi, there's something we need to talk about. Immediately, I'm on edge." My mom's not the type to just get straight to the point, so I braced myself for whatever was coming. She starts off casually, telling me how Brianna's been going through a rough patch. Apparently, Brianna lost her job a few months ago, and soon after, she lost her house. Now she and her 4 kids are living with my mom and stepdad, and, surprise, surprise, it's not going well. I listened, but I wasn't exactly feeling sorry for Brianna. After everything she'd put me through, I couldn't help but feel indifferent. Then my mom drops the real bomb. "Brianna's been asking if she and the kids can stay with you for a while." I swear, I almost dropped my phone. Stay with me? The same Brianna who spent her entire life making sure I knew I wasn't part of her family? The same Brianna who made me feel like I was worthless for years, and now she wants to move into my home with her 4 kids? I didn't even know how to respond. My mom took my silence as a chance to keep going, explaining how cramped their house was, and how it would really help if I could take Brianna in for a little bit, just until she got back on her feet. Now, here's the thing. I've worked hard to get where I am. I've got my own place, a job I love, and a life that's finally free of drama. The last thing I want is to bring Brianna and her chaos into my space. Plus, 4 kids? That's not a little help. That's a full-time commitment I never signed up for. So I told my mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Of course, she tried to talk me into it, going on about how Brianna's my sister and how family should help each other. But here's the truth. Family or not, there's only so much I'm willing to deal with. And Brianna passed that limit years ago. I told my mom, look, I get that she's in a tough spot, but she's never treated me like family. She made her bed, and now she has to lie in it. My mom didn't like hearing that, but I wasn't about to let her guilt me into something I knew I'd regret. Then, just when I thought that was the end of it, the very next day, Brianna called me herself. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so when I saw her name pop up on my phone, my heart started racing. Part of me didn't even want to answer, but I figured it was better to just get it over with. As soon as I picked up, Brianna jumped straight into it. No, hello, no small talk. "Lexi, I need your help," she said, sounding desperate. She went on to explain how cramped it was at my mom's house, how her kids were constantly fighting, and how she couldn't take it anymore. I just sat there, listening, thinking about how this was the same person who treated me like garbage for years, and now she's asking for my help, like we were best friends. But here's where things went from wild to completely absurd. Brianna didn't just want to stay with me. She wanted me to move out of my house so she and her kids could live there. I swear, I almost laughed out loud. She really told me that I could move back in with our parents because she needed my house more than I did. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a deep breath and said, "Wait, you want me to move out of my house for you?" I was hoping I'd misunderstood, but nope, she doubled down. "Yes," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "You can stay with Mom and Dad for a while. They have plenty of space, and I need a place for the kids." I had to sit down at that point. I couldn't believe her nerve. This was the same woman who spent our entire childhood making sure I knew I wasn't welcome, and now she wanted to take over my home? I took a moment to gather myself and said, "Brianna, that's not going to happen. I worked hard for this house, and I'm not giving it up for you." That's when she lost it. She started yelling, calling me selfish, saying I didn't care about family and that I was leaving her out to dry. She even threw in the fact that I don't have kids, like that somehow made me less deserving of my own home. At that point, I'd had enough. I calmly told her, "I'm sorry you're in this situation, but it's not my responsibility to fix it. You've never wanted anything to do with me, and now you expect me to uproot my life for you?" Of course she didn't take that well. She started screaming even louder, telling me I was a horrible person and that I was turning my back on family. Honestly, it was pretty shocking how quickly she went from desperate to furious. I didn't know what else to say, so I just hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured she'd get the message and move on, but I was wrong. A few days later, my mom called again, this time sounding really upset. Apparently, Brianna had been complaining nonstop about how I was being selfish and refusing to help her. My mom, bless her heart, was still trying to play the peacemaker, saying, "Can't you just let her stay for a little while? She really needs help, Lexi. But I wasn't budging. I told my mom the same thing I told Brianna. I'm not giving up my house. I'm not letting her walk all over me. I've had enough of her nonsense. My mom wasn't happy, but I could tell she was starting to understand where I was coming from. Even she couldn't deny that Brianna's entitlement was off the charts. Still, she was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace between her two daughters. But I wasn't about to let Brianna use that to manipulate me anymore. So after the whole phone call mess with Brianna, I was feeling pretty good about standing my ground. I figured she'd either find another solution or keep complaining to our parents until they got tired of her. Either way, I thought it was out of my hands and I could go back to living my life. But of course, it wasn't that simple. A couple of weeks later, I was home on a Saturday just relaxing when there was a knock at my door. Now, I don't get many visitors, so I was a bit confused. I wasn't expecting anyone. Honestly, I thought maybe it was just a package or something. But when I opened the door, there she was. Brianna, standing on my porch with all 4 of her kids and a bunch of suitcases. My stomach dropped. I just stood there for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just stared at me like I was supposed to know exactly why she was there. Lexi, we need to talk, she said, as if this were the most normal situation in the world. I could feel the heat rising in my face. At first, I wasn't mad, I was just shocked. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her kids were standing behind her looking tired and confused, and for a second I felt bad for them. But I couldn't believe she had the audacity to show up at my house like this, unannounced with suitcases, as if I was going to just let them move in. Brianna sighed like she was annoyed with me, which made no sense. "Look, Lexi, I've got nowhere else to go. It's too cramped at Mom and Dad's, and they're getting frustrated with me. I thought you'd have a little more empathy, considering we're family." Empathy? After everything she put me through, she wanted to pull the family card now? I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I tried to stay calm. I was still wrapping my head around the fact that she was standing on my doorstep, clearly expecting me to just let her and her kids move in. "Brianna," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I already told you, I'm not letting you stay here. I don't know why you thought showing up like this would change anything. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "You're being ridiculous. It's not like I'm asking for much. We'll only be here for a little while, just until I can get back on my feet." That's when my patience snapped. "Not staying here," I said, louder this time. "I'm sorry you're in a tough spot, but you've never wanted anything to do with me. And now you expect me to drop everything for you?" Her kids were starting to get restless, and I could feel the tension rising. I didn't want to make a scene in front of them, but I wasn't going to let Brianna steamroll me. Of course, she didn't back down. She shifted her weight and said, "It's not just about me, Lexi. Think about the kids. They need somewhere stable. Don't you care about them?" Let me pause here for a second. Of course I care about her kids. They didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't their fault their mom put them in this situation. But that doesn't mean it's my responsibility to fix everything. I barely knew them because Brianna had made sure I was never part of their lives. So while I felt for them, I wasn't about to let her guilt me into taking them in. "I care," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you made it clear a long time ago that I wasn't part of their lives. You didn't want me near them. Now all of a sudden I'm supposed to play the hero?" She huffed, glaring at me. "It's not about the past anymore, Lexi. You need to grow up. Things are different now. I'm asking you as a mother, not as your stepsister." I couldn't believe the nerve of her, as if her being a mother somehow erased all the years of cruelty. "Brianna, I'm not doing this. You need to leave." Her face twisted into something between anger and desperation. "So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on me and the kids? After everything we've been through, you're just going to let us suffer?" I was done. I was trying to stay calm for the sake of her kids, but her entitlement was too much. "You made your choice a long time ago," I said firmly. "You didn't want me in your life then, and I'm not letting you use me now." Her eyes narrowed as she glared at me. "You really think you're better than me, don't you?" That hit a nerve. I wasn't trying to act like I was better than her. I just wasn't about to let her walk all over me. But before I could even respond, her oldest kid, who looked about 10, tugged on Brianna's arm and said, Mom, can we go? I'm tired. Brianna glanced down at her, and for a second I thought maybe she'd give up and leave. But nope. She turned back to me, eyes blazing, and said, "You're making a huge mistake, Lexi. Don't think I'm going to forget this. With that, she stormed off, her kids trailing behind her. I watched as they loaded back into their car, Brianna muttering under her breath the whole time. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or just angry. Probably a mix of both. As they drove off, I shut the door and leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. I mean, I knew Brianna was entitled, but showing up at my house with her kids and expecting me to just roll over? It blew my mind. I felt bad for her kids. They didn't deserve any of this. But I wasn't going to let Brianna manipulate me into giving up my home. After she left, I called my mom to let her know what happened. She wasn't surprised, but she did sound disappointed that I hadn't helped. "I understand, Lexi," she said, "but Brianna's in a really tough spot right now. Maybe there's another way you can help." But I had already made up my mind. "Mom, I'm not getting involved. I can't. She's never treated me like family, and I'm not going to let her drag me down into her mess." My mom sighed. "I just wish things were different. Me too," I said, and I meant it. But some things never change, and Brianna was one of them. After Brianna stormed off with her kids, I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message. That was wishful thinking. I should have known better. Brianna wasn't the type to back down, especially when she didn't get what she wanted. But even then, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. This time, her voice was tight, like she was stressed or holding back. "Lexi, we need to talk," she said. I could already feel the tension building in my chest. "What now?" I asked, already exhausted by the thought of more drama. She sighed. "It's about Brianna. She's been talking to your stepdad and me non-stop since she left your place. She's saying you're being unfair and that you're turning your back on family. And she's making your stepdad feel like we should be cutting you off for not helping. For a second, I was stunned. Brianna was really out here trying to turn my own family against me because I wouldn't let her take over my house. The audacity. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Wait, she's telling you guys to cut me off because I didn't let her move in?" "Pretty much," my mom replied. "She's making it sound like you're heartless for not helping her and the kids. She's really got your stepdad all worked up. He's been talking about how we should be supporting her more as a family." I couldn't believe it. "Mom, you know that's ridiculous, right? She's trying to manipulate you because I won't give her what she wants. Mom sighed again, and I could hear how tired she was. "I know, Lexi, I get it, but things are getting tense here. Your stepdad feels like we're failing her as parents, especially with the kids involved. And there it was, the guilt trip. Even if my mom didn't mean it that way, hearing her talk about the kids made me feel like the bad guy. But I knew better. Brianna was using her kids as pawns, and I wasn't about to let myself get played. Mom, I'm not going to let Brianna guilt me into anything," I said firmly. "I understand the kids are in a tough spot, but that's on her, not me. She made her choices, and now she has to deal with the consequences." Mom was quiet for a moment. I hate seeing the family so divided. Me too, I said, softening my tone. "But this isn't on me. Brianna has treated me like I don't exist for years, and now she suddenly wants my help? That's not how family works. There was another pause before Mom spoke again. "I know you're right, but just be prepared, Lexi. Your stepdad is really upset, and I'm worried he's going to take Brianna's side in all of this. That hit harder than I expected. I've always had a decent relationship with my stepdad, and the thought of him turning on me because of Brianna's manipulations made me feel sick. But I couldn't back down now. I had to stand my ground, no matter how messy things got. Thanks for the heads up, Mom," I said quietly. "But I'm not changing my mind." "I know," she replied. "Just be careful, okay? I don't want this to get any worse. After we hung up, I felt this knot of dread settle in my stomach. Brianna wasn't just dragging me into her mess. She was trying to tear my family apart too. And somehow, she was managing to turn people against me, even though I was the one setting healthy boundaries. It was exhausting. But of course, Brianna wasn't done yet. A few days after that call, I started getting phone calls from other family members, people I hadn't talked to in months. My aunt, my cousin, even some distant relatives on my stepdad's side. Every single one of them had the same story. Brianna had been going around telling them how I refused to help her when she was desperate and homeless, painting me as the villain in her sob story. It was infuriating. I knew she was manipulative, but this was a new low even for her. I spent days fielding calls from concerned relatives, all of them trying to guilt me into doing the right thing by helping Brianna out. I couldn't believe how easily she'd managed to twist the story in her favor. It was like no one even cared to hear my side. At one point, my cousin, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year, called me and started lecturing me about family values and how I was letting my pride get in the way of helping someone in need. "Look," I told her, "you don't know the half of it. Brianna's been treating me like dirt since we were kids, and now she wants me to give up my home for her?" My cousin tried to argue that people change and that Brianna was just trying to survive, but I wasn't having it. "She hasn't changed at all," I said, my voice firm. "She's just using this situation to get what she wants. I'm not falling for it." By the time I hung up, I was drained. Brianna had managed to stir up chaos in my life without even being physically present. It was like she'd found a way to invade my space without actually stepping foot into it. I was exhausted, but I wasn't backing down. Eventually, the calls started to die down, but the tension with my mom and stepdad was still there. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. I could tell they were struggling to balance their loyalty to me with their guilt over Brianna's situation. It was a mess, and I hated that it had come to this, but no matter how much pressure was put on me, I wasn't giving in. Brianna had made her choices, and she had to live with them. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Brianna pulled one more move that took everything to a whole new level. One day, there was a knock on my door. After everything that had happened, I was a little paranoid about people just showing up unannounced, so I wasn't exactly thrilled to hear someone at the door. I checked the peephole and saw a man in a uniform standing there. My heart sank. Something bad was about to happen. I opened the door and the man handed me an envelope. "You've been served," he said. I just stood there staring at the envelope in disbelief. I hadn't done anything wrong, so why was I being served? I opened it right there, and to my absolute shock, it was legal paperwork. Brianna was suing me, to try and force me to let her and her kids stay in my house. I couldn't even process it at first. She couldn't guilt me into it, so now she was trying to legally take my home. I felt a wave of anger and disgust wash over me. Who does that? I immediately called my mom to tell her what happened. She was just as shocked as I was. "That can't be real," she said. "There's no way she can do that, Dot." But it was real. I double-checked the paperwork, and sure enough, Brianna had gone to a lawyer to try and pull this off. I was in total disbelief. I called a lawyer myself to figure out what my options were. Thankfully, he reassured me that the whole thing was ridiculous and that there was no way it would hold up in court. Still, the fact that Brianna had even tried something like this was insane. A few weeks later, we had our court date set. I was nervous, but I knew I had the law on my side. When the day came, I walked into that courtroom with a mix of anxiety and anger. Brianna was already there with her lawyer, and she looked smug, like she actually thought she was going to win. When the judge called us up, Brianna's lawyer started making this whole case about how she was a struggling mother of 4, and I was refusing to provide her with housing in her time of need. The way they talked, you'd think I was a heartless monster. They didn't mention how Brianna had treated me horribly for years, or how she tried to guilt and manipulate me into giving up my home. When it was our turn, my lawyer laid everything out. He explained how Brianna had never wanted anything to do with me until she needed something, how she'd shown up unannounced and demanded I move out so she could move in, and how she'd been trying to guilt me into helping her despite having no real relationship with me. The judge listened carefully, and I could see him nodding along, understanding where I was coming from. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The judge turned to Brianna and asked, "Why do you believe you're entitled to your stepsister's home?" That's when it all fell apart for her. She stuttered and tried to make it about the kids again, but the judge wasn't having it. He cut her off and told her in no uncertain terms that this was a ridiculous claim. He explained that I had no legal obligation to let her stay in my house, and that just because she was in a tough situation didn't mean she could take advantage of family. Hearing the judge say that out loud was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Brianna looked like she'd been slapped in the face. Her smug attitude disappeared and she stood there, speechless. She wasn't going to get what she wanted this time. The judge dismissed the case and that was it. I walked out of the courtroom with a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Brianna didn't even look at me as she left. She just grabbed her stuff and stormed out with her lawyer. I wasn't sure what would happen after that, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done with her. When I got home, I called my mom to tell her what happened. She was relieved, but also sad. I could tell she was still struggling with the whole situation, and I felt bad for her. But at the same time, I couldn't keep letting Brianna ruin my life. Enough was enough. Since then, Brianna hasn't tried to contact me. I haven't heard a word from her, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I've got my life back, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control again. So yeah, that's the story of how my stepsister tried to take my house and ended up losing everything. It's not exactly the happy ending I wanted, but at least now I know where I stand. And honestly, I'm just glad it's over. Story 2. Arthur Benford sat peacefully against the low stone wall of the 7th Cavalry Memorial on Last Stand Hill, looked at the time for a moment. The weight of the world rested on his shoulders as often as he could for a short bit longer. When the sun went down, he would stand and gaze at the surroundings. He would occasionally get communications from the deceased. If the park officers had given him a closer look before bidding him good night, they may have stayed with him. Rather, he was by himself. His body language and attitude conveyed the agony. He was clearly a guy in pain. Even as a little kid, when his father took him to the park, Arthur had known many of these individuals for many years. Because of his father's voluntary work there, Arthur was constantly at the monument. He even possessed the key to the gate which his father had given him. The Rangers played an old song again as they walked away like it didn't exist. Remember to lock Arthur up. Good night. It was Arthur's father who initially suggested Little Bighorn National Monument. Arthur taught history in Billings, Montana State University, carrying on his father's legacy. The battlefield was about 30 minutes away. Only his older brother Henry remained a relative when Arthur's father passed away suddenly a few years ago. All his life, he was Arthur's hero. Henry, who had always been Arthur's confidant, would have been the best person to help him with his current situation. Arthur felt that Henry was unaware of the turmoil that had been going on in his life for the past year, and he was too embarrassed to tell Henry about it. The descendants of the 7th Cavalry commander, including Arthur's father, loved General Ford. He said that Arthur never disclosed to his father that he had looked into this allegation for years and had not discovered any proof of a genetic connection. He wouldn't have survived it. From an early age, Arthur was enthralled with his father's stories and traditions of the brave 7th Cavalry. Fighting is not honorable. In actuality, it has never been that way. It is never attractive, even though it is sometimes necessary. It's clear that those who boast about how amazing wars are have never experienced pain. All that exists is death, and all of its associated horrors, followed by the survivors' nightmares. The one bright spot was that nobody under Ford's command had really made it through the nightmares. The majority of Anglo-Saxons identified it as Ford's final stand, but they were left to the battalions of Reynaud and Beckett. As he grew older, even as a teenager, Arthur immersed himself in the event's true history. Arthur was well versed in the politics of the day and the specifics of the conflict. He spent some time lost in the myriad scenarios and what-ifs surrounding Ford's actions. Like most individuals who have even a casual interest in it, he eventually outgrew it. He could no longer stand arguing with family members who made their decisions based just on Ford's filmography. For the moment, Ford was neither a genius nor an idiot, and he continues to represent the majority of cavalry officers. He was bold and unafraid. Cavalry leaders were taught to maintain control of the battlefield, fight until the end, and take all necessary action to reclaim the initiative if the adversary has it. Why? For the straightforward reason that the cavalry is frequently outnumbered and must employ the chuck method, which is a resolute triumph on the field. That was only, until lately, a catchphrase Arthur used in scholarly conversations with a small group of individuals who never really needed to use it. Arthur could now clearly see its significance. By the time Arthur finished school and began teaching at the college, he had become more interested in a side of the battle that most white people didn't pay much attention to. If Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Gaul, and the other indigenous leaders had the luxury of hindsight, would they have chosen to engage in combat at Little Bighorn? Although the Native American forces won what they called the Greasy Grass Battle, the Plains Indians' victory had little significance. They were bound to fail, whatever the result. The Indian authorities were probably aware of the difficulties they would encounter following the conflict. They fled to Canada right away and returned only to give up. Less than 5 years after it started, their golden age came to an end. Even after over 150 years, individuals may still clearly recall the horrors of that era, which included widespread starvation and fatalities. If the leaders had realized the devastation that awaited their people, they would have taken a different course of action, wouldn't they? No one seems to have apologized. If anyone did, they had fought the Spaniards 3 centuries before. Did they really think they could overcome the white man in the same manner? Perhaps they had nowhere else to go. Arthur believed that there were always choices in life. Would the lives of future generations of the Northern Plains indigenous people have been different if they had escaped to Canada that summer, knowing full well that an invasion was imminent and waited for the same 5 years? Arthur spent several hours researching the solution to the problem. From the perspective of Native Americans, almost nothing is known about their history throughout the almost 3,000 years that they walked the Great Plains. In an attempt to find the answer, Arthur contacted historians and experts from around the world. He grew so engrossed in it that he lost himself in it. After several years, he had reached a number of conclusions, but he still had no definitive answer. Arthur thought that the Sioux and Cheyenne had realized that some things are worth dying for. Arthur could find no more compelling argument. When a Plains Indian warrior was born, their morals were always clear-cut. It permeated every aspect of their existence. The ultimate glory for a warrior was to die in combat. First and foremost was the well-being of one's family and community. For a combatant, they had vowed to protect them with their life. This truth, which the military was all too familiar with, was the foundation of American military strategy during the Indian Wars. The army would have the advantage if they attacked the village, forcing the warriors to go on the defensive. It was successful until the day it led to the loss of the 7th Cavalry. Death is worth it for certain things. Like the Native Americans of the Plains, whom he had learned to value and respect, he was stuck. So on this uncommonly warm fall evening, he sat there till the sun sank below earth. His whole focus was on the gently undulating plain, which was covered with sage and tall grasses. Ford was mostly brought to his knees by the coulees and the ravines that crossed the battlefield. There was a part of Arthur that hoped the ghosts would provide him alternatives. It didn't happen. Then, for the 6th time, he peered down into the valley of the deep ravine. The final straw was that. They were encircled on June 25, 1876, when Hill gave way in their entrenched position on what would become Last Stand. The remaining 25 to 30 men tried to escape down the ravine to the river. They were forced to walk since their horses had either perished or been kidnapped by tribal women. In a matter of minutes, they were ruthlessly eliminated, never coming near. Contrary to the general perception that the troops' fighting discipline had declined over the whole battlefield, that was the only sign. Errol Flynn's cinematic depiction of the battle. Their boots were on when they died. It could have been partly right. According to legend, the warriors, led by Crazy Horse, launched a last conclusive attack that resulted in the murder of Ford and the majority of his officers. Arthur couldn't give a damn about the specifics, the fallout, or how the war affected American history now that it had occurred. The various troops' responses when they learned they wouldn't make it through the day filled his thoughts. He was able to comprehend thanks to the oral histories provided by the Indian combatants and the contemporary forensics conducted on the battlefield. He found out that some had yelled for aid or begged for mercy, while others had curled up in a ball and fled in fear. Some choose to end their lives rather than suffer at the hands of their vicious adversary. One courageous soldier is said to have gotten past the Indian fortifications by riding one of the few remaining horses to the battlefield. He was pursued by many mounted combatants. The troops were ready to give up and let him go so they could start fighting again. He shot himself in the head after drawing his sidearm. Some of them refused to give up and battled to the last, while others waited for death to strike almost sympathetically when their ammo ran out. Instead, was it resignation? Some might contend that the spirit's acceptance of its host's last breath was the cause of the tranquility rather than a conscious decision. Did the spirits of those individuals remain on the battlefield? The Ford National Cemetery was frequently covered in dense fog, yet some park rangers reported seeing ghosts as the sun rose and tried to clear the mist. They claimed to have seen them sitting peacefully atop tombstones or wandering the battlefield. Arthur enjoyed visiting the cemetery, but nothing was known about the tomb of Major Marcus Renault, the 7th's highest-ranking officer. Most people thought he wasn't deserving of the honor. Given that Major Renault's efforts on that sorrowful day were the only way any member of Ford's division could have survived in the heat of combat, some felt it was appropriate. What would Arthur say? He had to choose between serving his family, running away, or falling in love with a Sioux warrior. Even worse, no one was able to determine the right answer to that question until it was too late. However, Arthur Den Ford, a 37-year-old history professor, had at least one thing in common with his namesake. They were both positive that they would not survive the day, despite the fact that they were separated by almost 140 years. As they were standing here, like a warrior from India, Arthur would protect his family. On the battlefield, however, he would have the authority of a mounted cavalry officer. There was not much time. Arthur checked his watch once again. The moment had arrived. To be honest, he was a little behind schedule, but he could definitely make up time on the road. Before he could return home where his destiny was decided, he had a few more journeys to undertake. He took a deep breath and with tears of sorrow in his eyes, gazed out over his favorite battleground for the final time. Arthur had time to reflect on the events of the previous year that had brought him to this moment. The words that came out of Bella's mouth amazed Arthur during the hour-long trip to his final destination. His brain just rejected her words because they were so alien to him. Hold on, what? Could you say that again? I don't think I understand. A deluge of knowledge was rushing into his head. With a deep sigh, Bella gave a disapproving shake of her head. She blew up. This is likely to occur, the girl remarked. Listen, my love, I know you're having a hard time with this, but just follow me. For 13 years, I have been a wonderful wife to you and a terrific mother to our 4 kids. To be honest, though, I became tired of sitting at home. The children are all in school now. In any case, I have a lover. Actually, there have been a number of lovers in recent years. I'm sure you're joking. Arthur gasped in surprise and anguish. Arthur, pay attention to what I have to say. I mean it when I say that we must have a calm conversation about the direction our lives will go. Fine. But I think you've lost your mind. If you haven't been unfaithful to me for years, this is just a nasty joke you're playing on me. So why come clean at this time? Why don't you continue to cheat on me in private? He was so furious that he didn't even aware he had left his seat. He was pacing restlessly and clenching his fists repeatedly. Please take a seat again and quit shouting names, honey. You're not worthy of it. Actually, there are a number of reasons. The first is that I was only experimenting with the lifestyle to see whether I enjoyed it, which I clearly do, and I want to do a lot more of it. Therefore, it would be more difficult to keep you in the dark. In addition, even though you may not believe it at this moment, I do love you and we will be wed till the day we die. Nothing, I mean nothing, needs to change in our lives if you accept this. The women had made it clear to Bella that she should not disclose her ideas or the real results in any manner. Her goal was to completely subjugate him. Ultimately, make it simple for her partners to enter and exit the house and ensure that everyone in both families, particularly the children, is aware of what is happening. It was interesting, Arthur thought, that she only recalled that part of her vows. But I'll take everything away from you if you argue with me about this. The home will be mine. It will be paid for by you. I'll pick up the children. For a very long period, you will be able to provide me extremely considerable child support, and I'll do everything in my power to make it as hard as I can for you to see your kids. I'll put a lot of effort into persuading them that a divorce was your fault in order to turn them against you. You will also pay me a sizable amount of alimony for many years to come. Yes, indeed. I will also be able to retain my gentleman pals. Without the ability to think clearly, only I will be able to simply bring them into what was once your home and your bed. Arthur just sat there, staring at this woman while spluttering. Never before has he been so shocked as he was now. And since our divorce is so needless, it will be your fault, Arthur. During this time I have had 5 different lovers. And have you observed any changes? You've not, you know that. I remain the same devoted mother and wife I was and always have been. So yeah, you will let me enjoy this without interfering with our family time. Bellerby Ford sat with her legs crossed, arms folded, and uttered this smugly in front of her chest. She bounced her foot up and down as if anxiously waiting for a disobedient child to comply. Please go upstairs, take off your clothes, and make love to me. Now that the children have left for the evening. You are disliked by my other males. Although she was being truthful, she was never given the opportunity to complete her thoughts. As she had expected, she saw Arthur stand up. His eyes pierced hers for a moment before he silently stormed out of the house after giving her a cunning, menacing look. As he slammed the front door behind him, their wedding photo fell off the wall and onto the floor. The individual's happy, naive smiles were ruined by a piercing tear as the frame's glass broke. Bella was not very concerned by his remark. The girls had warned her of his anticipated initial response. They advised him to consider it for a few days before deciding they had no option but to go back. It was always the spouse. The women also suggested that you continue to be strong yet kind and perceptive. They had the chance to show their love for the cuckold spouse when the cunning husband finally returned, usually within 3 or 4 days. If the wife was serious about moving her relationship forward to the point she desired, it would be prudent for her to gradually transition into a female-led partnership. Every action she made had to be approved by her husband. She would then be able to take on the position of family matriarch at last. She was able to teach her daughters how to be a controlling spouse and teach her boys to accept their husband's power in this way. Her friends told her that she couldn't control her husband or have the life she desired without using the kids as weapons, even if she felt awful about it. She knew she had to finish it though, and Arthur's life would be better too, as he adapted to the changes. Later that evening, Bella told her friends about the horrifying look he gave her when she had her planned Zoom call after her husband's abrupt departure. A little smile appeared on her face. When the woman first suggested making the call, she said, "How am I going to do that if he doesn't leave?" They went on and made the call despite her kind chuckle at their lack of knowledge. I was reassured by those women that that was normal and completely normal for males, in the face of hardship. She was right to guess. They had been completely right up until now. 2 of the ladies whose husbands were the most unyielding claimed to have become full-time submissives while having the same appearance. They even assisted their husbands in getting dressed for their loves. Bella had some time to think quietly about how she became a powerful lady after growing up as a middle-class suburban wife. Whether she hadn't met 3 ladies by chance one day who would end up becoming her closest confidants and mentors, she wondered whether she would have spent her life in naive servitude. She left her mother and the 3 elder children that fateful day. She was so tired that she needed a break. Although it was rewarding, being a full-time mother was exhausting for her. Her life seemed ordinary and uninteresting. Furthermore, it didn't appear that issue would be resolved very soon. Even though Bella loved her husband, there were times when she wondered whether he truly realized how hard things were for her. To unwind, she chose to take the infant for a walk at her favorite park. She stopped at a table to hold the baby's bottle when 3 women approached her. Everyone else was talking about their families while pulling strollers full of kids. To Bella, they seemed so worldly and self-assured. They agreed to meet in the park once a week or to drop the kids off at Pablo's hole in the wall for margaritas. They thought it was a great idea and laughed it off. One of the parties at Pablo's was when she first started to be seduced. In the course of their meetings, Bella heard everyone praising their husbands and their families in general. It seemed as though they saw their spouses like family members. Once they were all lubricated and had completed their second Cadillac, Margarita. Bella wanted to know how they saw it. They were all laughing uncontrollably. They then introduced Bella to the appropriate lifestyle in a gentle manner. They depicted how easy and desirable it would be to do. The most important thing is that they convinced her that she deserved it. She accepted it without question since that was her view. She made a huge mistake when she asked the group innocently at one meeting whether anyone had a lover, father, and children. But she had good intentions. She was curious after reading many articles regarding heart racing on the internet. According to the articles, it sounded exciting. When she completed the question, everyone else gave her a horrified expression, and she realized she had made a mistake. Miss Kyo, as she insisted on being called her whole life, was the eldest and unofficial head of the group. She cautioned Bella about being impolite, but in a gentle yet stern manner. If she had thought about joining the group, she would have been expelled long ago, which is why she is so disgusting and harmful to her loved ones. Bella apologized profusely, but Miss Kyo was kind and understanding. This was no joking issue, she made plain. Allowing one of their male friends to impregnate them or allowing oneself to become pregnant by mistake are both extremely reckless. Managing your marriage as you are entitled to is a great deal of responsibility. You shouldn't try to make your husband feel inferior or ashamed. The goal should be to manage him and strengthen your union for the good of your entire family, including your spouse. Getting your husband to agree to your trysts, and perhaps like them, should be your aim. He needs to be handled very delicately and carefully. Men obey instructions that are clear and precise, even when they are not inherently good thinkers or perceptive. Put an end to this waste of time and focus on your plan. The last word on the subject was that Bella ceased utilizing the internet as a resource for anything pertaining to the subject after that. The most beautiful, fulfilling, and sensuous thing that had ever happened to Bella was the first time she had been unfaithful. It was also the scariest thing she had ever experienced. She was certain that Arthur would find her a blatant cheater when she returned home, but when he didn't, she felt strong and certain that this was the life she wanted. Miss Kyo lent her the guy, a longtime friend, so she could start experimenting with him. Bella was too likely to make a fool of herself and be discovered before her husband could step in. Therefore, Miss Kyo did not want her to seem very innocent and ignorant. This was going to take a while, of course. First of all, she had to wait 3 years for Melissa the baby to be old enough to start school before she could begin implementing her plan. She had many opportunities to study and be ready for the day when she would be in charge of her marriage and her life at this period. And practice too. When they first talked about having a family, Dee and Bella had decided that while Bella stayed at home and handled the most of the child-rearing duties, he should strive for a promotion at work so they could maintain their standard of living. Bella's first task upon changing her mind was to notify Dee, who was thrilled about the prospect. The ladies, all moms who stayed at home to raise their kids, advised Bella that being a full-time mother made it much simpler to convince her husband to help her. The primary reason was that the stay-at-home mother found it easier to get custody of the children in family court, while the fear of excessive alimony also played a part. While her husband would be living in a one-bedroom apartment within the poverty level, she would still be able to afford the house, of course. Bella briefly indulged in her fantasies of domesticating her husband before focusing on her responsibilities to the family. Arthur, S return home on the evening of the 4th day after their chat further demonstrated the intelligence of her arrangements and the skill of her female friends as directed. Bella chastised him for abandoning his family, especially his 4 kids, who were taken aback by his abrupt departure. But she also adopted a very protective stance, telling him again that nothing would change. She was determined that Arthur should sleep in their bedroom, even though it had only been 5 days since she had managed to win him over when he came back. This was necessary, the women had told her, and Arthur needed to be reminded of the children's emotions to make it possible. It seemed that everything was going according to plan. Arthur did what he usually does, I see now. In order for them to figure out how to get out of this situation, he pleaded with them to go to therapy. But in the end, he gave in and became quite obedient. His statement that she should keep her secret existence hidden from him, the home, and the children was the only thing that disturbed her. He wouldn't be held responsible for his conduct if she didn't. The woman comforted Bella by telling her that this was a normal response at the time of his intervention. She left the situation alone after her training. If Arthur brought it up again, Bella had been told to answer generically, but he hadn't done so yet. Positively, the ladies had told her that most spouses at first adhered to the out of sight, out of mind rule. They advised her to start gradually changing the balance of power in their relationship after a few months. It shouldn't have been so simple to destroy his cozy existence. However, because Bella had vowed that her other life would be invisible to him, Arthur found himself spending a lot more time with his children, even taking them to the battlefield on occasion, even though they were too little to properly comprehend it. Save for his oldest, he was able to overlook the deterioration of his marriage because he loved spending time with his children, even if he believed his relationship with his wife had stagnated. Arthur owes his teachings and his unrelenting investigation. His connection with Bella had become exclusively sexual. He took great pleasure in the idea that he was only one of her many buddies that took advantage of her body to get that release. He no longer hated her, but he also no longer loved her. She was now only a passing aspect of his existence. Until the children were 18 or he found a way out, he had to tolerate her presence. Thus, Arthur's reality continued to function normally for a few months. He then had to leave school early one day due to a horrible headache. He noticed a number of odd automobiles parked in his driveway on his way home. He was going to park on his lawn and barge into the home in his first rage, believing Bella was hosting her male pals. He changed his mind though and chose to drive around the block, park out of sight, and think it over. Openly adoring one or more of the bastards at his house throughout the day didn't fit with her well-arranged existence. She was too careful and precise to do that in front of her neighbors. Arthur made the decision to investigate. Arthur could enter their home undetected since it had a walk-in basement from the backyard. As he crept up the stairs, he heard Bella and 3 other women's voices looking through the broken door as he reached the landing. He could see the 4 of them sitting around the breakfast table, chatting rather seriously while sipping tea and munching on cookies. Not your normal hen party, of course. He wasn't surprised by the news, but it did send chills down his spine. Not long ago, Bella had started acting strangely, but Arthur had thought it was nothing. She had asked Arthur to carry her purse while they went shopping so she could look at the items, but it had been small stuff. And last week, in spite of his repeated demands that she desist, she began referring to him as Georgie rather than Arthur. These women were now explaining to him why these adjustments were being made. As part of a well-thought-out plan, which the ladies were pleased to inform him had previously succeeded in their own marriages, they were giving Bella instructions to make these adjustments. In an attempt to determine if Arthur was ready to go to the next phase of his life, the 3 ladies questioned Bella about his response to her stimulation. She would soon further feminize and subjugate him by following directions until he was emasculated. It wasn't as bad as that, though. One of the ladies, Miss Kyo, who appeared to be the group's head, told Bella what put a stop to the masquerade life he was enjoying. I needed to do all of the upcoming actions in order to accomplish my ultimate objective. She desired control over the management of their marriage and the upbringing of her children. She wanted her males to understand that they were obedient to the women in their life, and her girls to understand their role as leaders in a partnership. Bella had been certain that they would be the first to create a better world. Additionally, Miss Kyo described it as a female-led Level 4 connection, SLR. In addition, she claimed that it was the West's fate. Miss Kyo's tone was severe yet maternal when she addressed Bella. Arthur could see that Bella was becoming the woman she had promised to be, a woman who knew and had lied to him about using chastity devices and wearing women's underwear, and who planned to live in the home with her lovers, kids, and relatives. Arthur needed to get away. His breath was ragged and his heart pounding. He strode noisily down the stairs, en route to his vehicle. Anger, an anger he had never experienced before, rushed through his mind. The other women were enthralled with Miss Kyo, and he wanted to strangle them, every single syllable. Above all, Arthur felt angry that he had allowed himself to be caught in this predicament. He had to escape somehow. In order to plan his escape, he made the first of many trips to his safe haven, driving aimlessly for the next hour. The children were in bed when he arrived home that evening, and Bella had sent him a ton of SMS and calls. In spite of this, he returned home with the resolve to never be apart from his children. He intended to buy himself some time rather than dissolve their absurd union. His first concern was his children, and he wanted to relax and find a way to preserve them. How was he going to save them from this hyena pack's fate? Identifying the witches who dehumanized his wife and finding a way to make them accountable for their misdeeds were his goals. He wasn't a special forces operative, he wasn't a detective, and he wasn't an expert in surveillance. He was an ordinary history professor at a nearby college, and he was wise enough to understand that a simple divorce would not affect the distribution of assets or child custody, and that it would be pointless to use infidelity as a reason for divorce. But he would start with research since he was good at it. When Arthur informed Bella that he was ill, which was entirely true, she sensed something was wrong. He vowed to himself that he would behave properly with Bella, but he was clearly unable to do so. "I'm not even questioning the fact that you look terrible, George." Before Arthur even got to the sink, he threw up all over himself and the kitchen floor. Bella screamed with fear and genuine worry. "First thing in the morning, you're heading to the doctor." No argument. "George, I'm hoping you're about to go to bed." Arthur was able to throw up into the sink once again, but this time he just nodded and started walking away from her without giving her another look. After then, the family dynamic shifted. In addition to keeping his knowledge of his imminent death a secret, Arthur avoided playing into Bella's hands anymore, which must have annoyed her. One night when she was lying in bed, Bella turned to Arthur and gave him her most seductive glance, whispering, "Georgie, I want to try something different tonight. I think it would be really wonderful to make love to you while you're wearing my underpants. There are a couple pretty pink ones, but I don't think it will happen." Bella did so she could escape her. While at a department store, he rolled over. At one point, she pleaded with him to hold her handbag, but he just said, "Get a wallet if your purse is too damn heavy." Then he went away. These small victories, though seemingly inconsequential, gave him time, and so it went on for a while. While listening in on another coven meeting at his place 2 months later, he heard Bella voice her disappointment with Arthur's alleged lack of advancement. The women encouraged her to be patient and keep trying, assuring her that this was but a brief setback and that her ambitions would still be pursued, arguing that Arthur would finally give him what he wanted since males were inherently weak-willed. However, Arthur continued to do study, and the findings were, to put it gently, startling, and at worst, frightening. Arthur's health declined precipitously, as was to be anticipated. He began to lose weight, then his appetite, and finally his blood pressure and pulse rate soared. In addition, he was always very nervous and irritated. After Bella repeatedly expressed concerns about Arthur's health, he ultimately sought assistance from a number of physicians and therapists. But he decided on this last course of action after reviewing his most current test results at his previous visit with his family physician. "There seems to be a problem, Georgie. Is there something she says constantly that bothers you?" "Bella, do you believe that my health may be slightly impacted by adoring half of Montana?" Incredulously, Arthur questioned. "Arthur?" All I can do is shake my head and wonder. "We've spoken about this a lot, Georgie. Your hyperbole is getting out of hand. Maybe you would see that they are not a threat to you or our marriage if you met one of my male pals." Just before he blew, he had an idea, and his clear eyes were struck by his angry mask. "Bella, you know, it might not be such a bad idea. Would it be helpful?" If she hadn't been so focused on herself and her objectives, she may have shuddered at his appearance. Instead, she was happy about this sudden development. Arthur's thoughts returned to the present by the time he arrived at the Billings outskirts. He looked at his watch once again. He would manage, but it would be close. Around 8 o'clock, he reached his first destination, and another check verified that he was back on track. Good evening to everyone. Greetings and thanks for watching the 11 o'clock evening news broadcast on Channel Success. Greetings, I'm William Cook, and I'm here to inform you that Isabel Reno, one of my co-workers, is now out of the office on assignment for Channel 6. I hate to break the dreadful news, but a horrible tragedy has struck our little, close-knit community of Billings once more. These kinds of tragedies have happened far too often in our great city in recent years. Let's get straight to Isabel without spending any more time. Isabel, regards Bill. Before her cameraman gave her the all-clear to go live, Isabel had carefully checked her makeup and mentally prepared herself to project the appropriate balance of astonishment and empathy while keeping the confident professionalism required of her by her job. She shook her head slowly and seriously, then glanced over her shoulder at the black and yellow crime tape that ran across the blocked roadway. "I am standing outside another crime scene of unspeakable horror," she muttered. In keeping with the series of terrible catastrophes that had been reported earlier in the hour, the cameraman zoomed in on two burly police officers securing the area. Police received a complaint about gunshots earlier tonight from a residence in the quiet, affluent Cameron Park area. Dispatchers attempted to call the homeowner's phone but were unable. When the police came, the house was already secured. Nevertheless, when police looked out a window, they observed what seemed to be many persons completely unconscious. They located an unnamed adult guy and a married couple when they entered the residence through a broken window. Right now, everyone is obviously dead. After displaying a photo of two police officers squirming and chatting aimlessly, the newscaster paused to roll his eyes at the world frantically before saying, "The investigators are working extremely hard to figure out what happened here." But that was the risk of doing live spots. The identity of the victims and a potential reason for what happened have not yet been made public by the police. They have only assured us that the neighborhood is not in danger. Isabel stopped for effect. Before using her superb reporting abilities to educate the audience, she allowed their discontent at not being given any risque facts to boil for a while. As the two cops held up the tape, a second unmarked detective unit pulled up outside the residence. A guy emerged from the house and walked in nonchalantly. The cameraman swore under his breath, "Oh no." As he marched through the police lines, couldn't he have at least sprinted into the place? A middle-aged man with sad eyes and a little weight nodded at the uniform guarding the entrance. He hobbled up the Ford house's driveways. It appears that Captain Frederick Beckett was just what he said he was, a cynical, overweight, somewhat balding and jaded detective captain with the Billings Police Department. He did not smoke, but he was an alcoholic who drank too much. Too much had been witnessed for him to be normal. He would be keen to retire if he were even for a callous veteran of countless graphic murder scenes. It was an especially awful work week. Beckett found these murder scenes annoying. They were awful individuals. He took note of every feature, demonstrating his obvious attention to detail. From the outside, the house always seemed like the home of a normal American family. The horrors he would see there, however, were anything but commonplace. This one was no different. The sprinklers had just gone off as he arrived at the steps. There were bicycles on the porch grass, and the lawn was well kept. The next block over, he noticed a newspaper. Outside, he could hear children having fun. There were no children playing on the street. As they were standing on the pathways, every neighbor gazed gravely at the yellow tape-surrounded house. He nodded to the patrol officer on duty, cursing himself for not retiring and caving in to his now ex-wife's demands last year. Outside of his employment as a police officer, though, he knew little, so they went their own ways. It was a wonder to Beckett why his marriage had ended. He never said a word, and neither did his wife, and that was all. Papers were served to him. One day, he believed that the pair had just given up because they were exhausted. Compared to the typical police marriage, he had been married to his wife for 26 years. "How are you doing, Cap?" As he entered the crime scene through the main door, the lead investigator yelled. He posed the question without feeling or anticipating a definitive response. "Lieutenant Calhoun? Good. We received a standard murder-suicide. Family feud. These seem to be coming in all the time these days." Beckett almost choked on the sights and scents around him, so he made up this allegation. Captain Beckett was aware that his career was coming to an end. A knot formed in his stomach. "I had to use all of my resolve to keep a composed countenance. He hated the sweet foul smell of dried blood even as a youngster. There was also blood, bones, and brain tissue everywhere. For novice police officers, scenes such as this may be extremely upsetting, and in order to cope, some of them could go for help. However, because it is humiliating for their other officers to see them in such a situation, they usually just throw up and carry on. It doesn't make you feel confident. More precisely, before approaching the home, Captain Beckett had noticed 2 piles of fresh excrement outside the walkway. After a few years of service, police officers lose compassion for the suffering of victims. If you fight it, it will either devour you or turn you into a roaming zombie. Some people hope to go at this time. This explains why there are so many rookies on the police force. To Beckett, they appear to be becoming younger and younger. In addition, society's expectations of them keep getting higher. A horrible ending was inevitable. An officer who has not yet resigned has reached the last phase. Sometimes the tiniest, most innocuous thing is what triggers an event. It had the ability to shatter even when a small puppy cried because its leg hurt. The hardest of veterans, Beckett said. It's been too late by now. You can either take a bite out of your weapon or retire, or maybe you can do both. Captain Beckett had no intention of retiring. He had run out of resources, Cap, both yes and no. Beckett watched passively as the lieutenant moved forward. He understood Calhoun's way of thinking. Lieutenant Calhoun's gun, hand, and head were all in unison, which was an uncommon instance of the lieutenant's mind and speech working together. No one cared. He was responsible for saving the lives of many BPD officers. Perhaps we should simply wait for Algernon to come back. He is managing the CSA on this one, which is not unexpected. He where? I'm interviewing the husband's brother a few blocks over, the guy replied, pointing to the chair where Arthur Dent Ford's lifeless body was still lying. He is working on a hypothesis while making a sympathetic but irate gesture. Beckett nodded, snorting. Yes, said Calhoun, and Captain Beckett shook his head disapprovingly at his smile. Yes, he sat in the rear seat, and he was driven by one of the uniforms. Algernon Smith was a notable crime scene investigator because, well, he was different. Although most people thought Smith was strange, Beckett and Calhoun knew he was a master at examining murder scenes. His hypotheses were superior to most of the station's empirical data. For choosing the month and year that Smith would be wrong, there was a $10 pool. The pool has been in place for around 5 years. Beckett never thought he would finally win the part since he had been selected. Yes, he would probably be dead and unable to gather. Smith had never had a legal driver's license. He said it was too dangerous. In assigned units, he loved riding shotgun. While being driven about by a subpar probationary police officer, he would resort to shouting for help from onlookers. Nobody was foolish enough to fall in love with Smith, not even the rookies. Algernon began working for the police department at what time, being the governor's nephew. It certainly helped. However, the department would have had a lot more employment openings. Weirdness was a requirement for employment. Isn't getting shot at, assaulted, and spat on everyone's ideal job? Ultimately, Smith was the best crime scene expert available. It was then that Algernon returned. Okay, tell me the story, Algernon. It appears to be identical to the others. Beckett was at a loss for words, so he repeated himself. Just your typical column. Daily suicides and domestic murders. These days it seems like they occur daily. That's how it appears on the surface, boss, but that's not at all what this is. Very far away. Awaiting Smith's further explanation, Beckett raised an eyebrow curiously. He feared that he would be held accountable if he made Algernon start over. A uniformed young woman entered at that moment, handed Algernon some notes, and left quickly before the stink could get to her. Then he remarked, "Well, Captain, our shooter over there had a dead man before he pulled the trigger," pointing to the deceased victim who was lying in a chair. "All right." And he quickly showed the captain some documents saying, "I found this over there, so we know that." Then he gestured toward the darkness. This indicates that Arthur Ford, our shooter's spouse, had terminal cancer. He could have had 2 or 3 months remaining, if I understand correctly. Although he was aware that it would take some time, Captain Beckett could sense Smith's excitement and the abundance of fascinating knowledge he had to provide. Well, that's fascinating. But Beckett and Calhoun, who were patiently waiting, frowned at one another as Smith started to relate his narrative. Cap, let me begin at the beginning. It appears to me that our suspect's spouse was holding out for his wife to return home. In my opinion, he also anticipated that his wife's friend would accompany her. Calhoun opened his mouth to say something, but changed his mind. The wife's companion is the first victim. He also passed away first. His ID revealed him to be 27-year-old Sage Waterman. We don't currently have any information on him or any link to the Fords. Bella Ford, the wife, is the second victim. Even though he regretted it deeply, Beckett had to say something right now. But you believe that the husband over there was waiting for them to arrive, and that Waterman was the wife's lover? That's intriguing. How could he have known? Fortunately, this allowed Algernon to continue instead of having to start again from the beginning. Calhoun and Beckett were even more convinced that something had changed fundamentally, were they not? In other words, she informed her husband that she was bringing her lover home. As you can see, Waterman just managed to go through the door before his husband shot him once, striking him square between the eyes. His expression of surprise is still visible. Algernon found it interesting that a departed person's appearance might tell a story, but Captain Beckett didn't believe it. Beckett examined Arthur's body, and he seemed calm and comfortable. If you hadn't noticed that a large portion of his head was missing, you could have thought he was asleep. His wife, on the other hand, had a look of unfathomable agony and terror. Her lips was hanging wide, and there were 2 streaks of dried mucus evident in both her mouth and nose, as if she were going to scream horribly. Beckett got chills thinking about what had happened before she died. The body of Bella Ford was lying face up. She appeared to be trying to ascend the steps. She was shot at the doorway, just like Waterman. Her death came more slowly, yet her blood trailed all the way to her husband's feet. What was she doing? Algernon? Attempting to ascend. Captain, they had 4 children. When Beckett's nearly empty stomach started to rise, a hint of redness left his cheeks. He was ill to his stomach and felt nauseous. Since the chief disapproved of policemen who puked at a crime scene, especially the detective captain, he started to flee. Hold on, Captain. Cap, they weren't at home. The home was empty of them. The brothers' residence was where they were. I went there for that reason, at any rate, a portion of it. Did the brother give any insight? Beckett said after getting over his nausea. In an attempt to restore his dignity and composure, he was horrified to learn of his brother's passing, Captain. I asked him how the kids ended up staying with him after he had calmed down. Earlier that day, Arthur had stopped by with his 4 children and asked if they might remain for the weekend, according to his brother Henry Ford. Bella. And Arthur needed some time to sort things out, so they apologized for the short notice. Henry told him that since their children enjoyed playing together, there wouldn't be any issues. I was curious as to whether he saw anything unusual in his brother's actions. He could only add that Arthur had been acting a little glum and aloof lately. Strangely, Arthur had called Henry on his cell phone just prior to the shooting here. Pulling up his phone, Algernon played a recording for Beckett and Calhoun. To guarantee accuracy, his conversation with Henry was taped. He hit the play button. Yes, Arthur did call me, as I said before. I appreciate you keeping an eye on my children while I'm away. I'm sorry to have involved you in all of this, Henry, he continued. I was concerned because he seemed depressed. No issue, I assured him. We always try our hardest to keep them safe. Yeah, you're a good guy, he said. I appreciate you being my brother. Algernon put the phone back in his pocket after it suddenly stopped filming. Beckett listened carefully, though he was about to faint from hyperventilation. This is getting too old for me. Whoa. He took a moment to gather himself. Why go up there if the children weren't present? Calhoun and Beckett had never seen Algernon's face like that before. He had taken off the mask. For this he had been notorious. He looked like he was about to cry. They were incredulous. Smith, muttering was halting. I'm thinking, the spouse said to her. Up there they were. For the first time in the last 10 minutes he began to continue but stopped himself. Calhoun said, Oh my God, he must have detested her greatly. They all 3 nodded slowly in accord. Beckett ended Algernon's thought. He struck her in the stomach. He wished for a slow death for her. Smith only gave a nod of assent. Lieutenant Calhoun went back to talking. Cap, Jesus Christ. With a note of enthusiasm in his voice, Smith declared, We're now approaching the exciting part. The neighbors reported hearing 2 consecutive, extremely brief gunfire. Boom, boom. After 10 to 15 minutes, the third shot was fired. Not a huge thing, is it? Except, Captain, take a good look at the weapon. It is a single-action cavalry Colt model from 1873. This individual was skilled. This brings me to today's major news. He paused. Calhoun emphasized, "Just spit it out, Smith, please." His tenure with the firm was almost as lengthy as Beckett. "You are both aware of the shooting that took place across town earlier this evening, Pablo." "Yeah," Beckett said cautiously. "They are already dismissing that one as a phone scam," to quote Beckett. Beckett's contact was the Charles Bronson film telephone from 1977, when a phone call comes in. In the movie, seemingly normal people would suddenly start shooting. Authorities were increasingly using the phrase phone to refer to any murder that did not follow a set pattern and did not seem to have any connection to the victims. "I don't believe that was it, Captain." He pointed to Arthur's dead body and stated, "I believe this man did it." Even more startling, it takes a lot of work to be a seasoned police officer. However, Calhoun's and Beckett's mouths dropped and their eyes widened. Christ Jesus, the forensics will have to wait. However, this man succeeded, I'm sure. Why is the question I am still unable to answer. Why did this apparently well-mannered history professor cap 3 women in a packed restaurant before leaving in a composed manner? After that, he returns home, murders 2 more people, and ends his own life long before he could stand trial. To connect him into Pablo's Algernon, you need to offer us more than that, and I'd never dispute with you. He nodded to show that he agreed. I spoke with the suit's handler, Captain. According to the tale they pieced together, a white adult man calmly entered Pablo's hole in the wall a few hours ago, took a handgun from his belt with the cross-handed grip, and said in a low voice, "You are evil and you have to be stopped." In less than a second, he fired 3 headshots, hitting each one squarely in the eyes. A couple of the wits remarked as he casually went out after putting the firearm back in his belt. The gunman approached the table directly. He didn't aim aimlessly or scan the area for somebody only to make an impression. He paused. The majority of witnesses, those who weren't catatonic anyway, could only characterize the weapon as a large, antique silver firearm. One gun enthusiast, though, informed the cops that the weapon seemed to be a single-action, Colt, 1873. He absorbed it, then continued. He continued by saying that the reason the shooter shot so quickly was because he used a fanning motion with his offhand. With just one action revolver, he is able to shoot 3 people in the head in less than 2 seconds. He also shooting in a way that can sometimes even trick the most experienced marksman. Even in Billings, there aren't many of those men out there. Mr. Arthur Denford is our shooter from Pablo's. I know that much for sure. Jesus H. Whoa! I'm at a loss for words to address Calhoun. Beckett was furious with him for whatever reason. I swear to God. He was also losing control of his nerves. Algernon, all right, but why? Well, Captain, I think we'll find out within a day or 2. What the heck? As said by Algernon, this is what I discovered in the shooter's wallet. Then he was given a receipt with today's date and time from the post office around the block. It was a receipt for about $100 from First Class Postal, shortly after Pablo was shot. I went to the post office next. While returning, I paused to speak with the cashier. She's also a kind woman, competent in her area. Her description of our gunman is accurate, even down to the bolo tie. There was a bag full of letters addressed to everyone on the earth, and he had to scan the postage for them. Whoa. I wonder if there's any way we could get some of the letters. Beckett remarked, I really wanted to read one. We will. Speaking timidly, Algernon said that he was the recipient of one of the letters. It was Beckett's time now. Captain Jesus H. Whoa! He was unable to breathe and was in terrible discomfort. Without another word, he had to leave that place right now. Desperate for breath, he stumbled toward the entrance. Smith and Lieutenant Calhoun followed him as he exited a shock. He never reached the grass. On the porch, he vomited. Beckett knew he had seen too many crime sites at that point and decided to stop. The seasoned cameraman, who was still concentrating on Isabel, was now the one who was surprised. In the corner of his lens, he saw a detective vomit on the porch of the house where the crime had been committed. The idea of what it must have been like inside the house made him shudder. He was unwavering in his concentration on Isabel's TV-ready face, though. With a figure that men coveted and a face that women could overlook, Isabel was the perfect example of a female news spokeswoman. However, because his wife didn't watch television, the cameraman hadn't loved Isabel. Isabel was able to improvise sometimes without sounding like a 6-year-old and read teleprompters with perfection. An uncommon talent in this field. I'm standing here with my neighbor, Mrs. Caroline Hargrove. Has anything like this ever happened here before? Isabel's tone gave the viewers the sense that she was unsure of the answer. Absolutely not. The place is really helpful, courteous, and serene. Together, the children play. She was wringing her hands and on the edge of tears because she was so distraught, as said by Mrs. Hargrove, who had been told not to reveal anyone's identity. You knew the victims so well that I know it's difficult for you. That family was very amazing. They obviously cared for each other. At last, she broke down and began to cry. The videographer was so excited that he lost control. It was amazing. TV. As she leaned in for a last close-up with her cameraman, Isabel murmured, "A very hard day indeed." Her blue eyes were focused on the camera as she gave Miss Hargrove a gentle shoulder rub. "Bill, I'll see you in the studio shortly." As anticipated, the camera returns to William Cook, who shakes his head empathetically and is clearly upset. Another horrific, pointless shooting incident. He holds his sympathetic stance for a few seconds, then straightens up, and a smile appears on his face. We must now take a commercial break, but you will want to keep watching. Everyone. FR. The Blackfoot Ranch's 7. The farmer who cultivated the largest squash in the history of the state will be speaking with Mary Hannah Ross. When we get back, she'll be here. Last words. A few days later, in his well-lit but unkempt office, Captain Tom Beckett quietly got his letter. Captain Beckett, excuse me. Hello, my name is Arthur Den Ford, although I'm sure you've heard my tale before. Even if I might not have acted morally, I tried all in my power to stop the madness that had affected more than just my family. I won't bore you with every detail, but I've supplied the post office's key to P.O. Box 117 and detailed information on what I found after I finished my research there. I shot the 3 ladies at Pablo's hole in the wall, even if the ballistics haven't verified it yet. For their crimes, they were appropriately put to death. My inquiry revealed that they were accountable for 2 further murders and suicides, one of which involving their children, in addition to ruining my family's lives. In addition, their actions resulted in 3 divorces and the incarceration of several husbands for domestic violence. I kept trying to talk Bella out of her terrible, crippling delusions, but she continued on her downhill path. How they were able to persuade my wife to follow this path of self-destruction is still beyond me. When I learned that I was terminally ill, I realized I had to take action. I couldn't risk abandoning my kids to that crazy mom and her ill friends. I had to after everything else had been tried. With a tired sigh. Unfinished, Captain Beckett folded the letter and put it back in the case folder with the key. After gathering his things and taking one final glance around the room, he got up quietly. Beckett sighed deeply again, stooped down to examine the file, tapped on it twice quickly, turned, and walked calmly to the personnel office. A jerk. We always have choices. Captain Beckett abruptly left the Billings, Montana Police Department's personnel office and walked into the chief's office. Without a word, he set his gun and shield on the desk, turned, and walked away. Naturally alarmed, the chief reported to his staff that Captain Beckett seemed to be dead. Since then, nobody in Billings had seen or heard from him, but they most likely didn't want to because they were worried that Beckett's problems may spread. Ultimately, someone would have noticed even if his first retirement check hadn't been paid. Captain Beckett was never seen again in Billings. Henry Ford, troubled by his affection for his younger brother and the brutal acts he had committed, visited Little Bighorn National Monument just over a month after Captain Beckett vanished. "Why didn't you talk to me, Arthur? Maybe we could have worked this out together." Henry felt certain that Arthur hoped his mass letter would elicit a more robust reaction that would disclose the truth about what was going on and the reasons for his actions. Although it was understandable that their loved ones were horrified, the incident received very little media coverage. "This kind of thing happens so often now that people are numb to it," Henry said. Ultimately, it didn't offer feminine hygiene goods or beer. There. A local news station conducted a follow-up, but it merely mentioned that an ongoing family quarrel was the cause of the tragedy. No matter who Arthur was, he was still his brother, and Henry dutifully carried out the directives Arthur had sent him in his previous letter. Already, Henry and his spouse were working diligently to get legal custody of Arthur's 4 children. Although Henry suspected that his wife and kids were not aware of their parents' predicament, he was certain that their parents' destiny would soon catch up with them. Even Bella's parents concurred that her children had the best chance of leading a typical childhood with Henry and his family because she was the only kid. However, because there was no formal will or trust declaring possession, the process was outdated and took some time to complete. The remainder of Arthur's ashes were to be strewn at the foot of Marcus Reno's gravestone at the National Cemetery, while the bulk were to be dispersed around Last Stand Hill. Henry understood that Arthur's legacy would be like Major Reno's, just as Arthur had asked at that very time. He never returned to the memorial and went glumly back to his car. In conclusion, Arthur would be a terrible, inept madman who harmed a lot of people. He would also be a failed father and husband who did not defend his family. A few years later, a recently hired park ranger was strolling across the grounds in the early morning when he noticed a person hidden by the fog that frequently covered the National Cemetery. The ranger pondered how that idiot had gotten in here while the figure sat still with its back to Marcus Reno's grave. He pulled his radio from his belt and walked ostentatiously toward the individual, ready to remove him forcefully if necessary. He opened his mouth to say something, but the figure disappeared into the fog. This was one of the numerous ghost stories he had heard about this place. This apparition was obviously clad in contemporary attire, in contrast to the typical accounts of Native American warriors or 19th century cavalry. He seems to have witnessed the ghost placing something on Reno's gravestone. The ranger reached over, grabbed an old key, and put it back where it belonged. On the headstone. Since the grave sites were considered hallowed land, the rangers had been explicitly instructed to remove everything that was not insulting or hazardous. With a shake of his head, the ranger vowed to keep what he had witnessed to himself. He put his radio back on his belt and continued with his day. Story 3. I was screwed when my spouse tossed me out for his sister and her husband. Though I'm not really sure where things started to go wrong, I suppose I have been noticing signals for some time now. Looking back and wondering how you missed the fact that things were spiraling downhill. You ever experience that sensation? Indeed, I find myself in such type of state. Anna here, 40 years old, and up until lately, life has been really pleasant. Day trader and investor, I have been able to lead a decent life for myself. Considering that I have a hereditary illness, though it's not life-threatening or anything, I have to exercise caution and go gently. Sometimes. I'm not pushing myself excessively here. That quote is what the physicians advise generally. The truth is, it has been allowing me to lead a really restricted existence. I made good money working from home, and I was very cool with the thought that maybe having children wasn't in my future. I have found peace with this, but John comes in here for that. My spouse John is 30 years old. Indeed, he is younger than me by a good 10 years, which first worried me, but it never really felt like a problem between us. We got together when he was serving tables at this restaurant I enjoy visiting after work. He originally seemed to be just the adorable man delivering my dinner. We merely exchanged little conversation here and there. Not really much. Still, we grew friends over time. Not even sure exactly how it happened. We were simply chatting casually one day, when the next thing I knew was that we were hanging out more and more outside of the restaurant. Things became serious not too long ago. Really, he was nice, attentive, and simply appeared to really care about. I recall the day he first suggested marriage. I faltered. Given the complete impossibility to have children, I wasn't sure whether I should say yes. I wanted him not to feel as like he was passing on anything. John, though, was totally in line. Time and time he reassured me that it made no difference to him. He responded something like, if I had wanted children, I would have gone with someone else. Though right now it seems harsh. At the time it was consoling. He wanted me simply, not some perfect existence including children and all that. I therefore came to believe him. After a few months, John stated he wanted to remain home and take care of things, even though he was still working as a server. We were married and everything were fantastic. Initially, being a stay-at-home spouse appealed to him personally and really sounded ideal. If I looked after everything at home so you could concentrate on your career, wouldn't it be simpler? One night he remarked. I agreed because absolutely. Why not? He enjoyed cooking and often spoke about wanting to open his own restaurant someday. I considered perhaps this would be beneficial for him, a means of experimenting with cuisine and honing recipes while I was working. At first, it was rather fantastic. You know what I mean. I would come home not actually come home since I work from home, to a spotless house, meals ready and things seemed to flow. He was delighted doing what he liked while I was busy earning money. At least that appeared to be the case. I felt for a time we had it all figured out, but then gradually, things began to shift. It was not like an overnight change of direction, but I saw small details. The house wasn't as tidy as it had been, first of all. When I left my office at the end of the day, there would be dishes in the sink or sporadic clutter all over the living room. John seems to let things drift. He used to be rather exact about keeping everything orderly. He began spending much more time on his computer, engaged in video game activity. I'm not against gaming or anything, but it got to the point where he was sleeping during the day, staying up all night, and his whole schedule completely inverted. I aimed to discuss it with him. John, you spent all night gaming, and the home is really messy. Surely we can work this out. One evening, the mess was simply too much to overlook anymore, and I recall telling him. Apologizing, he added, I'm just really into this new game. He looked at me half guilty, half furious. I swear to get back to cleaning. I'll finish it shortly. For a brief period, I believed him. Then he stopped playing that game and launched another. The house remained untidy and I felt as though I was sharing a roommate rather than a spouse. In the morning I would pass him and he would hardly see me, so engrossed in whatever was on his screen. Though I felt the space separating us was widening, I continued to believe it was only a phase. Perhaps he needed a pause, some time to relax before picking back into the flow. But it went beyond the house or the gaming as well. John ceased to be in the present. He was physically there, certainly, but it felt as though he was not truly with me anymore. He started eating supper in front of his computer, while I ate by myself. It became usual. He wouldn't even eat with me at all occasionally. He would say, I have tonight's raid. I'll eat later and vanish into the other room to finish supper by myself. Though those dinners by themselves hurt, they seem little. After a hard day, I used to like sitting down with him, catching up, telling stories, laughing. Now I was simply munching leftovers while he was out in some virtual world. It wasn't only dinner at night. John would remain up playing while I went to bed without him. He still wouldn't be there when I woke up middle of the night. This became our routine going forward. I sleep and eat by myself, and the man I wed seemed to be stranger. I would ask him where he was going throughout the day. When he vanished for hours merely shopping, he would reply. He would dismiss it as not relevant when I would push for further specifics, though. I wanted not to be the nagging, questioning wife that questions everything, but I couldn't help feeling as though something was strange. He would have returned carrying bags full of items, but he never requested for anything specifically. Just haphazard events devoid any logical basis. It got to the point where I was unsure about our direction as well. He was checked out as I was furiously working to support both of us, running his own life from the same house. I thought of myself as wedded to a ghost. Before he basically moved out of his locked bedroom door, which used to be our bedroom, I would find myself wondering where the man I fell in love with disappeared to. Though I couldn't get rid of the sense that something more was happening, I didn't know how to bring it up without starting a major argument. I thus continued, believing things would improve on their own. Looking back, I suppose I ought to have challenged him sooner, but I didn't. I let things pass, considering it as only a little hic-up. Deep down, though, I sensed something had changed and it was not returning to its former state. I eventually had enough after months of juggling the clutter, late-night gaming, and continual apologies. Really, how long should I have been sitting there watching him sloppily while I carried all the weight? It was not as if I was urging him to act insane, just tidy the house, prepare food, perhaps pay me some occasional attention. You know, ordinary events for a couple sharing a house. One night at 4 a.m., after he had left for bed, I recall hence once more. Sitting in the living room, I was fixating on the disarray. Tucked everywhere are clothes, dishware in the sink, on the coffee table, half-eaten sandwich on display. It struck me at that moment. I registered for a different life than this one. I assumed we were in this together, hence I married John. Suddenly, though, I felt as though I was the only one who gave a damn. I resolved the next morning that I could not wait any more. We needed to discuss. Just blurted it out as I entered the bedroom where he was still passed out. John, we really ought to discuss. Like rather seriously. Speak. He grumbled, moaned, pulled the blanket over his head. Can it hold waiting? I'm exhausted. No, I answered. It cannot wait. I too am weary. Not only from poor sleep though. Feeling as though I'm doing this marriage alone wears me out. That grabbed his interest. He sat up, wiping his eyes. What are you referring to? I am here, isn't I? You are indeed here physically, yet you are not here. You seldom talk to me, stay up all night gaming, and the home is messy. Not a spouse. I feel as though I'm living with an adolescent. He sighed after just staring at me for a minute. I have been sloppish, I realize. I have lately been under stress. You are right. I find peace in gaming. I nearly laughed, stressed John. What would you be stressed about? You manage none of the bills, you have no employment, and the house is the only thing you're meant to look after, and even in that case is disintegrating. He seemed somewhat ashamed, but instead of apologizing, he became combative. Not as though I do nothing. I clean when I can and cook. You seem to be sitting about doing nothing all day, as I am now doing. I back off. You wanted to be a stay-at-home spouse. That was your suggestion. I spend all day working so we may live comfortably. And you're behaving like a young person without responsibilities. After that, he had not much to say. He simply sat there staring at his hands as though they had turned into the most fascinating object on earth. You are supposed to step forward. Though I was boiling within, I informed him, attempting to keep my voice cool. You have to start behaving like a partner, rather than merely someone who shares the rent-free room if you want this to succeed. John nodded, still not looking at me. All right, he said in a whisper. I will arrange it. I wished I could trust him. I did exactly. Maybe this talk would help him understand he had to change and get him waking. Still, it soon became clear that nothing really was going to happen. He first sought to present a different picture of things. He cleaned the living room, made a wonderful meal that night, and for a second I felt a bit hopeful. Maybe this was the tipping point. Maybe things were going to get better. But the emotion didn't stay long. The next several days were back to the same pattern. He'd cook, yes, but everything was hurried, no care, went into it any further. The dinners felt more like something he did out of responsibility, not because he genuinely wanted to. The cleaning, half-assed at best. He'd vacuum but leave items lying about everywhere. It seemed like he was doing just enough so I couldn't complain, but not enough to truly make a difference. And then the games that never ended. Every night it was the same thing. I've got a raid with my guild tonight, or I'm almost done with this level. Just give me a bit more time. A bit more time. Always turned into hours. I'd go to bed alone, and he'd still be up. When I got up for work in the morning, our distance was widening and I had no idea how to close it. It went beyond simply the housework now. We were not really bonding at all. We scarcely spoke. He never appeared interested in whatever I was doing, never inquired about my day. Feeling invisible, I would consume the food he gave me and sit in a neat, silent house. The last time we had a real chat unrelated to the home or his games eluded me. At least then there was something there. Hence I would even catch myself occasionally missing the clutter. It was now like living with a ghost that happened to wash laundry. I kept convincing myself that, given some time, things will get better. Perhaps he simply wanted space and was going through something. But the more I attempted to justify it, the more I saw I was merely giving him cover. Actually, I hadn't been happy, and I hadn't been for some time. One night I was sitting at the kitchen table gazing at the supper he had left for me after he had gone off to his guild war or something. Though newly made and still warm, I couldn't muster myself to eat it. Feeling very alone in a house I used to adore, I just sat there gazing at the food. Uncertain of what to do. Though another side of me believed it wouldn't matter. Part of me longed to face him one again. What could I possibly say, not having said already? I told him how I felt. Nothing changed. As I considered it, I came to see that perhaps he had lost interest. Perhaps the John I married wasn't returning, and I was clinging to this concept of him that had vanished. I wanted things to return to their former state. Hence I was clinging on. Deeply, though, I knew it was not going to happen. So I sat there in solitude, wondering how I got here. Wondering how someone I hardly knew turned from the buddy I used to have. The worst of all is also I knew not how to make things right. That evening I turned in without bidding goodbye or asking whether he was all right. I just laid there, gazing at the ceiling, wondering whether this was the course of life I would be on. It was evening like every other. Trying to concentrate in my office, John entered looking more sober than I had seen him in a while. Though he stood there like he had something important to say, I hadn't even realized he had left the home earlier. "We should chat," he advised, and my stomach fell just like that. Tone was something I understood. I had heard that before, and often it signified something I wouldn't enjoy. Trying to cool myself, I turned away from my computer. "Perfect. What's happening?" He hesitated for a moment, then responded, "My sister and her husband. They are living with us beginning today." IBL blinked. "Wait, what?" "They are experiencing difficulties," he said. "Economic difficulties. They need somewhere to live and cannot pay their rent anymore. They could remain with us for a little," I told them. My head was faltering and keeping pace. "You informed them then they could move in exactly that without even consulting me?" John moved uneasily. "It's not as though I don't consider it. I understood that may be difficult for you, but Anna, their family. They're nowhere else they could go." What I was hearing defied belief. Between the two of us, we were already juggling plenty problems. He now wants to bring 2 more persons into our house, the house for which I paid, and where ought they to be staying? Though the second was aggravating me more, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "John, there is nowhere for 2 more individuals. This is not a huge house." He added, like it was no great issue, "They could use the guest room. It's simply transient." I could feel my blood pressure increasing, not temporary or not. "John, making judgments this kind without consulting me is not something you can do. Here is my residence. Now you're telling me I should support 2 additional people, while I am the one paying all the costs. He answered defensively, "I'm paying for stuff too." "Indeed, what? For months you have not paid the bills." I reacted back, not even attempting to keep my irritation under control now. "Currently I have to feed and shelter your sister and her husband as well. I am the one paying for everything. From what standpoint is that fair?" He moaned and worked at the back of his neck. I assumed it would not be that significant of a purchase. "They want assistance. I am in need of assistance, John. I need you to really be a spouse in this marriage and get active. We hardly could be holding it together as it is. And you now wish to include 2 additional persons into the mix. This is not about only looking after them. You never ever considered how this may affect us. He said not much to that. Though I could tell he was defensive, I would not back down. He had not brought on me a little matter. It was colossal. How on earth could he not notice that? He responded at last, "They help out around the house." Like it was meant to bring about perfect harmony. "They won't simply be slothful freeders. I will check to be sure about it." I nearly burst out laughing. "Help out here, John." "Not even now are you assisting out. When we already find it difficult to keep this business open, how are they expected to pitch in?" The silence lasted for a long time. Though John seemed to be searching for the proper words, really I felt there were none. Frustrated, I felt as though daily events were only growing worse between us. Now, this is before I could say anything further. It was like feeding the flames gasoline. The doorbell sounded. I paused briefly. "Is that right?" John shook his head. "Yeah, that is them. I invited them to drop over tonight." Indeed he did, without previously telling me. I bit my tongue, trying not to lose it totally. "Perfect." With a tense voice I said. Later on, though, we will be discussing. He nodded fast and left me there angry to go answer the door. This seemed unbelievable, yet it was occurring. Trying to keep our marriage intact had already worn me out, but now I had to welcome his sister and her husband too. I seemed to be losing control over everything. Karen, John's sister, looked worn as he returned carrying them. Mike, her spouse, was reserved, although neither of them looked too disturbed by their just moving in situation. That was it. They glanced at me, said their kind hellos. Like this was expected, of course. Like it was hardly a big thing at all. Karen replied, seated on the couch like she already belonged there. We truly appreciate this. We have just been having great difficulty making ends meet with regard to rent, the expenses, you know. Though I didn't feel like smiling, I pushed a smile and nodded along. Indeed, I understood, and I spoke attempting to maintain calm. But deep down I was enraged. The fact that they were now invading my house did not seem the least bit troubling to them. Nor any embarrassment, nor any true thanks, simply entitlement, not worry. We'll assist with the housekeeping, Mike added in, like that was meant to make everything right. We will also locate our own apartment as soon as we get back on our feet. Right. Though I was dubious, I said. People say things like that all the time, but it never comes out the way you hope. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could handle for the remainder of the evening. Something told me they would be here for longer than they were disclosing. I said very nothing at all. Mike sat there as though he were trying not to exist as John and Karen caught up talking about bygone eras. Sitting in the corner, I felt absolutely invisible, as though my viewpoint was absolutely useless. Like I was only a spectator in my own house. I was emotionally and psychologically exhausted by the time they at last turned in for sleep. I felt as though my life had become unrecognizable. I signed up for a life different from this one when I married John. It was not even close, hence I had no notion how I should handle all of this. I examined my checked-out hubby, 2 additional residents of my house, and the mounting awareness that I was losing control over all I had laboriously produced. That evening I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling and raced through ideas. I was unable to carry on doing this. There has to be something giving. I didn't know, though, what to do next. Things deteriorated quickly from the time Karen and Mike moved in. Everything sensed strange. It seemed as though they carried with them a mist of anarchy. Suddenly, our house was no longer ours. I tried first to be patient. I didn't want to aggravate them as I knew they were under financial difficulties and all around anxious. Still, gosh, they did not make things simple. The home began to fall apart virtually right away. Stacked in the sink were dirty plates. I couldn't even enter into the living room without walking over heaps of their clothing, or rearranging their trash off the couch simply to sit. It more than simply a mess. It smelled bad. After a demanding day, I would get home instead of unwinding to find Karen and Mike lying around TV as like they had no cares at all. I was essentially living in a pigsty and they were not assisting. Not with regard to the cleaning, not with food, not groceries either, not with anything. Karen would leave her things all over, and Mike was not much improved either. Empty mugs, filthy socks, food wrappers, just strewn all throughout. To be honest, I doubt they bothered to clean the whole time they were visiting. Really, given they are essentially freeloading, how could 2 adults not even consider helping out around the house? I attempted to hang on to it for some time. I wanted no role as the evil guy. I was wondering perhaps if I say anything, they'll see how much of a mess they are creating and chip in. Naturally, though, it did not transpire. It simply got worse. At last, I was tired enough. One evening, following third daily tread on one of Mike's soiled socks, I snapped. John was seated on the couch with them, not seeing anything odd. Just sitting and chatting like this was usual, said John. I walked over trying to remain composed. Could we chat for a moment? Though he seemed upset, he got up and trailed me into the kitchen. I let it out as soon as we lost earshot. John, this is starting to become absurd. I cannot lead life like this. They are not contributing in anything. The house is messy, and I feel as though I am the only one that gives a damn. He simply looked at me as though I were the one acting irrationally. They are living through difficult circumstances, he remarked, almost as though he were chastising me. You could just give them a break, a pause. What I was hearing defied belief. John, they arrived here weeks ago. They are dirty. They're not cooks. They do nothing except exacerbate the condition of the house. Picking up after them wears me out, and I'm tired of being treated like this isn't my house too. His face changed and he seemed furious. You then expect me to throw them out? They belong to families. Anna, they want assistance. I'm not requesting you to get them kicked out. I want them to assist around the house and start behaving like grown-ups. Is that somewhat excessive to ask? Frustrated, I could feel my own voice rising. That marked the downward turn of events. He snapped. He said, "Guests. Maybe you should also go if you cannot respect me in front of my family." Still in awe, I stood there. "Please let me apologize. You listen to me." John raised his voice and said, "Now, maybe you should be the one leaving if you find this difficult. They're family here. You're selfish, so I'm not kicking them out." Self-serving? That was the word that burst through. I realized suddenly I was done. I became indifferent. Being treated disrespectfully in my own house fatigued me. Tired of John treating me like I was the problem while protecting his sister and her spouse. I didn't leave in the other room, most likely listening to everything. Enough is enough. She entered our bedroom directly, picked up a suitcase and got to work packing. John let me go without trying to stop. He said nothing. Though I wasn't, I believe part of him assumed I was bluffing. I was done. That evening I walked from the home. Though first I was not sure precisely where I was heading. I knew I had to go as far away from it as possible. Driving aimlessly for a little, I remembered this opulent resort a buddy had told me about. Quiet and precisely what I wanted. It was out of the way. That same evening, I checked into a hotel. It seemed like entering another planet. The cozy bed, the gentle lighting, the solitude and quiet. It was a far